Wife sent husband back to the suburb. Poor people belong in the ghetto. 5 years later she saw him on TV and couldn't believe what he had become. The words Claudia had screamed at Robert before slamming the door still echoed in his mind like hammering nails. She had thrown his belongings into garbage bags, leaving only the smell of expensive perfume and the echo of her high heels on the marble floor of their Westchester County apartment. Gabriel, 10 years old, sat quietly on the leather couch they could no longer afford, watching his mother pack designer clothes while his father stood paralyzed, holding his teacher's briefcase and a stack of unpaid bills. The pandemic had cost Robert his job at the prestigious private academy, and Claudia had chosen luxury over family without a moment's hesitation. Gabriel's quiet tears cut through the silence like broken glass. "Why is Mommy so angry, Daddy? Did we do something wrong?" Robert felt the world crashing down as he knelt beside his son on the expensive couch that would stay with Claudia. His trembling hands smoothed the boy's messy hair, and for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. Gabriel was smart, observant, and had heard every cruel word his mother had shouted about being trapped with a loser and wasting her life on someone without ambition. Robert opened his arms and pulled his son close, promising silently that he would never abandon him, even if the world collapsed around them. Robert looked around the luxury apartment that had become his prison over the past 3 years. The granite countertops, the designer furniture, the walk-in closet full of Claudia's shopping addiction. Everything that she had demanded he provide through credit cards and loans that had consumed every penny of his teacher's salary. Claudia had drained their joint savings account to buy a new BMW just 2 weeks before Robert lost his job, leaving them with only $200 in checking and a mountain of debt that made his stomach churn. The financial betrayal hurt as much as the emotional one. She had been planning her escape while pretending to support their marriage. The refrigerator was nearly empty, except for expensive organic foods that Claudia had bought for her Instagram photos. Robert found half a container of leftover takeout that cost $40, money they didn't have, and divided it between 2 plates for Gabriel and himself. As he watched his son eat slowly, savoring every bite like it was a feast, Robert's heart shattered into pieces. This child deserved stability, love, and security, not the chaos of parents who had lost their way in materialism and broken promises. The thought of taking Gabriel away from this luxury to live in his childhood home in East Cleveland filled Robert with shame, but also with a strange sense of relief. The phone rang 3 times before Robert answered, hoping it might be the school calling him back to work, or maybe a parent wanting tutoring sessions. Instead, it was his neighbor from East Cleveland, Mrs. Rose, the 65-year-old woman who had been like a grandmother to him growing up. "Bobby, I heard about what happened through your cousin. You and that sweet boy can come home anytime you need to. I got clean sheets on the bed and food in the refrigerator." Her voice was warm and genuine, so different from the cold indifference he had been living with for months. Robert felt tears of gratitude that he tried to hide from Gabriel, who was watching him with the intense attention that children show when they sense their world is changing forever. Outside, the sounds of Westchester County seemed to mock their situation. Expensive cars starting in driveways, neighbors discussing their vacation plans, children playing in manicured yards while their nannies watched from Range Rovers. Robert sat on the edge of the couch and put Gabriel on his lap while the boys' stuffed animals lay scattered around them like refugees from a better time. "Daddy's going to take care of you," Robert whispered, though he had no idea how he would keep that promise. But the look of absolute trust in Gabriel's eyes told him that he had no choice but to find a way, no matter how impossible it seemed. The memory of the last fight with Claudia hit him like a physical blow. "You're pathetic, Robert. Look where we live now. My friends have houses in the Hamptons and husbands who drive Maseratis, and I'm stuck in this middle-class prison with you." The words had been like daggers, especially because she had said them in front of Gabriel, who had cowered in fear, seeing his mother filled with such venom. But what hurt most was remembering how she had laughed when he suggested they downsize and live within their means. "Live like poor people? Never. I didn't marry you to live in some ghetto apartment." In that moment, Robert knew that the woman he had fallen in love with no longer existed. Night fell over Westchester County like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Robert tucked Gabriel into the king-size bed they would leave behind tomorrow, promising him that they would find a new home where love mattered more than money. He lay on the living room couch for the last time, using his jacket as a blanket, while Gabriel slept peacefully in the bedroom. In the darkness, Robert listened to his son's steady breathing and felt a mixture of terror and determination that he had never experienced before. He didn't know how, but he was going to pull his family out of this hell and give Gabriel the father he deserved. His last thoughts before falling asleep were about Claudia. She was probably already planning her new life, maybe texting the wealthy men she had been networking with at her corporate job, men who could give her the lifestyle she demanded. Robert had seen how she changed after they moved to Westchester, how she began to see their previous life with new eyes filled with contempt for everything that had once made her happy. He wondered if she would think about Gabriel before falling asleep, or if she had already erased them from her mind, like she had erased the years of love they had shared. But tomorrow, he would start building something better, something real, something that couldn't be destroyed by greed or betrayal. The drive from Westchester County to East Cleveland felt like traveling between two different worlds, and Robert's old Honda Civic, the only car Claudia had left him, wheezed and groaned with every mile, as if it understood the weight of their defeat. Gabriel sat in the passenger seat, quietly watching the neighborhoods change from manicured lawns and luxury cars to corner stores with barred windows and houses that needed paint. When they passed a group of children playing basketball in a parking lot, Gabriel asked, "Are we going to live here forever, Daddy?" Robert's throat tightened as he answered, "We're going to live wherever we can be happy and safe, son. And right now, that's with Mrs. Rose." The boy nodded with the resilience that children possess, accepting this new reality with more grace than many adults could manage. Mrs. Rose was waiting on her front porch when they arrived, wearing a flowered dress and the biggest smile Robert had seen in months. The small house looked exactly as he remembered from his childhood. Peeling paint on the shutters, a tiny front yard with more weeds than grass, and neighbors who sat on their porches watching the world go by. But when Mrs. Rose hugged Gabriel like he was her own grandson and told Robert, "Welcome home, baby. This house has been too quiet without children's laughter," Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the warmth of unconditional acceptance. Gabriel immediately took to Mrs. Rose, asking her about the vegetable garden in the backyard and the old cat that rubbed against his legs like he belonged there. The first week without the luxury of Westchester was like learning to breathe underwater. Robert woke up before dawn and walked the neighborhood looking for work, carrying his resume and hoping someone would need a history teacher turned handyman, tutor, or anything that paid enough to buy groceries. Gabriel had adapted to their new routine with remarkable maturity, helping Mrs. Rose with simple chores and reading books from the local library while Robert searched for employment. "Daddy, I like it here," Gabriel told him one evening as they ate Mrs. Rose's homemade soup at her kitchen table. Mrs. Rose tells better stories than Mommy's TV shows. The innocence in his son's voice broke Robert's heart and healed it at the same time. Mrs. Rose had taken on responsibilities that weren't hers, but she did it with the joy of someone who had been waiting years for a purpose beyond her daily routines. She woke up early to pack Gabriel a lunch that was more nutritious than anything Claudia had ever provided, walked him to the neighborhood school that was 10 times smaller than his previous private academy, and spent afternoons helping him with homework while Robert searched for work. "That boy is smart as a whip," she told Robert proudly. "He's been reading my history books and asking questions that would stump college students." Gabriel had found in Mrs. Rose the grandmother figure that Claudia's wealthy parents had never bothered to be, and watching them together filled Robert with a bittersweet joy. Money became an obsession born of desperation. Robert had found work tutoring neighborhood kids for $20 per session, meeting in the local library or Mrs. Rose's living room, helping teenagers prepare for their SATs and younger children with reading comprehension. The work was fulfilling but barely covered their basic expenses. Gabriel's school supplies, groceries that Mrs. Rose insisted on splitting despite Robert's protests, and the small contribution he insisted on making for rent, even though she refused to accept it. Some weeks they lived on $10 a day, but Gabriel never complained, never asked for the expensive toys or games he had been used to in Westchester. Instead, he seemed happier playing in Mrs. Rose's backyard, reading library books, and helping his father prepare lesson plans for their tutoring sessions. The neighborhood had its own rhythm and community that Robert had forgotten during his years in Westchester. Mr. Johnson from next door brought them vegetables from his garden. The teenagers Robert tutored started helping Mrs. Rose with heavy lifting and yard work, and the corner store owner, Mr. Abdul, began setting aside day-old bread and milk nearing expiration for families who needed it. "This is what real community looks like," Mrs. Rose told Robert one evening as they watched Gabriel play with neighborhood children in the street. "Rich folks got money, but poor folks got each other." It was a lesson in humanity that no private school curriculum could teach, and Robert realized that Gabriel was learning values that would serve him far better than designer clothes and private tennis lessons. The idea for the YouTube channel came from pure necessity and Gabriel's endless curiosity. While Robert prepared lessons for his tutoring students, Gabriel would ask questions about historical events that were both simple and profound. Why did people think slavery was okay? How come women couldn't vote? What made people so angry during the Civil War? Robert began recording their conversations in Mrs. Rose's backyard, using his old smartphone and natural lighting, creating videos that combined serious historical education with the genuine wonder of a 10-year-old discovering the world. Gabriel's questions were unscripted and authentic, and Robert's answers were delivered with the passion of someone who truly loved teaching rather than just collecting a paycheck. The first video got 12 views, mostly from neighbors who had heard about their project. The second got 37. By the end of the first month, they had uploaded 15 videos and gained 200 subscribers who appreciated the unique format of father-son historical discussions. Robert edited the videos late at night after Gabriel went to sleep, learning software techniques from free online tutorials and slowly improving the quality with each upload. Mrs. Rose became their biggest supporter, promoting the channel to everyone she met, and even appearing in a few videos as Grandma Rose, sharing stories about living through historical events that Gabriel had only read about in books. The neighbors began suggesting topics and even offering their own stories about family members who had served in various wars or lived through significant historical moments. The breakthrough came 3 months after they started, when a video about the Underground Railroad featuring Gabriel's questions and Mrs. Rose's family stories about ancestors who had helped enslaved people escape went viral. The video reached 50,000 views in 1 week, and the comment section filled with teachers asking permission to show it in their classrooms, parents thanking them for making history accessible to children, and historians praising Robert's ability to explain complex topics in simple terms. Gabriel read every comment with excitement, especially the ones from other children who said they had become interested in history after watching their videos. "Daddy, we're helping kids learn," Gabriel announced proudly, and Robert realized they had stumbled onto something more valuable than any corporate job. The phone call from Claudia came on a Tuesday evening, exactly 4 months after she had thrown them out. Robert almost didn't answer when he saw her name, but Gabriel was at the library with Mrs. Rose, so he picked up out of curiosity rather than hope. Claudia's voice sounded strained, artificial, like she was reading from a script. "Robert, I've been thinking about Gabriel. Maybe it's time for him to come back home. This living situation can't be good for his education." She didn't ask how they were doing, didn't mention the YouTube channel that had over 10,000 subscribers, didn't acknowledge that she had abandoned her son for 4 months. Robert felt a familiar anger rise in his chest, but it was mixed with something new. Pity for a woman who had chosen material things over the love of an extraordinary child. "Gabriel is home, Claudia," Robert replied calmly. "He's happier, healthier, and learning more than he ever did in Westchester. We're building something real here." The silence that followed was filled with all the words she couldn't say, all the regrets she wouldn't admit. and all the bridges she had burned in pursuit of a lifestyle that had left her fundamentally empty. The second call from Claudia came 6 months later, but this time her voice carried a different tone. Desperate, humbled, stripped of the arrogance that had defined their last conversation. "Robert, I lost my job. The company downsized, and I can't afford the apartment anymore. I need help." The irony wasn't lost on Robert, as he listened to the woman who had called him a failure, now begging for assistance from the man she had thrown away like garbage. Gabriel was in the backyard with Mrs. Rose, planting tomatoes and asking her about the Great Depression for their next video, completely unaware that his mother was finally experiencing the financial insecurity she had accused Robert of bringing into their lives. "I'm sorry to hear that, Claudia," Robert replied with genuine compassion. "But Gabriel and I have built a new life. We can't fix problems we didn't create." The YouTube channel had grown beyond Robert's wildest dreams, reaching over 50,000 subscribers who eagerly awaited their weekly uploads. The comment section had become a community of teachers, parents, and history enthusiasts who shared their own stories and educational resources. Gabriel had developed a natural charisma on camera, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence for a 10-year-old. Their video about the civil rights movement, featuring Mrs. Rose's memories of watching Martin Luther King Jr. on television, had been shared by educational websites and viewed over 200,000 times. Robert began receiving emails from documentary producers, textbook publishers, and educational consultants who wanted to collaborate or hire him for projects that could provide real financial stability for his family. Gabriel had thrived in ways that expensive private education never could have achieved. The neighborhood school, despite its limited resources, challenged him to be creative and resourceful rather than simply memorizing information for standardized tests. His teachers praised his curiosity and leadership qualities, noting how he helped struggling classmates with their homework and brought historical artifacts to class presentations that he had learned about from their YouTube research. "That boy has something special," his teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, told Robert during a parent conference. "He doesn't just learn history, he understands how it connects to people's lives today. That's a gift you can't teach." Gabriel had found his passion, and it was infectious to everyone around him. Mrs. Rose had become more than a landlady or babysitter. She was the grandmother Gabriel had never really had, and the mother figure Robert needed during his transition to single parenthood. Her house filled with laughter and learning, transforming from a quiet retirement home into a vibrant center of creativity and education. She helped research historical topics, shared family stories that added personal depth to their videos, and provided the emotional stability that allowed both Robert and Gabriel to heal from the trauma of Claudia's abandonment. "Y'all saved me as much as I saved you," she told Robert one evening as they watched Gabriel practice his lines for an upcoming video. This house was dying without young voices in it. The financial situation had stabilized gradually but consistently. Robert's tutoring business had expanded through word-of-mouth recommendations, and he was now charging $35 per session for specialized SAT prep and $40 for advanced placement history tutoring. The YouTube channel had been monetized and was generating enough revenue to cover their basic expenses, while brand partnerships with educational companies provided additional income that Robert saved for Gabriel's future college expenses. They lived simply but comfortably, with enough money for Gabriel's school supplies, Mrs. Rose's medical prescriptions, and occasional treats like pizza nights or trips to the local museum. It was a far cry from the artificial luxury of Westchester, but it was real, sustainable, and built on honest work rather than credit card debt. The neighborhood had embraced their project as a source of community pride. Mr. Johnson had built a small outdoor studio in his backyard where they could film when weather permitted, and local teenagers volunteered to help with camera work and editing in exchange for tutoring sessions. The corner store owner, Mr. Abdul, displayed flyers for their YouTube channel and often suggested historical topics based on current events. Even the local news station had done a feature story about the neighborhood teacher who turned his living room into a classroom for the world, which brought them even more subscribers and recognition within the educational community. Gabriel basked in the positive attention, but more importantly, He began to understand that he could make a difference in other people's lives through education and storytelling. The first book deal offer came from an educational publisher who had been following their channel for months. They wanted Robert to write a series of children's history books based on the format and topics that had made their videos successful, with Gabriel contributing questions and illustrations. The advance was modest, but significant enough to allow Robert to consider reducing his tutoring load and focusing more time on content creation. "Does this mean we're going to be rich, Daddy?" Gabriel asked when Robert explained the opportunity. "It means we're going to be comfortable, son," Robert replied. "But more importantly, it means we can help even more children learn about history." The conversation reminded Robert of how different Gabriel's values had become compared to the materialistic environment he had been exposed to in Westchester. Mrs. Rose had begun appearing regularly in their videos as Grandma Rose, sharing stories about living through historical events that brought a personal dimension to abstract historical concepts. Her segment about rationing during World War II, complete with recipes and household tips from the era, became one of their most popular videos and spawned a series about how ordinary families lived through extraordinary times. "I never thought my old stories would matter to anybody," she told Robert after reading comments from viewers who thanked her for helping them understand their own grandparents' experiences. "Turns out, every old person is a history book waiting to be opened." Her wisdom and warmth had become integral to their brand, and Robert knew that her contributions were irreplaceable. The recognition from the educational community had opened doors that Robert never could have imagined during his private school teaching days. University professors were inviting him to speak at education conferences. Museum curators were asking him to consult on family-friendly exhibits, and other YouTubers in the educational space were requesting collaborations. Gabriel accompanied him to these events, often answering questions from audiences who were amazed by his knowledge and articulation. "That child is going to change the world someday," a professor from Columbia University told Robert after Gabriel had delivered an impromptu explanation of the Constitutional Convention to a group of graduate students. Robert felt a pride that was different from anything he had experienced during his marriage to Claudia. This was pride in substance rather than superficial achievements. The third call from Claudia came almost exactly 1 year after their separation, and this time she was crying before she even spoke. "Robert, I saw Gabriel on the news. He looked so happy, so smart. I made the biggest mistake of my life." The local news feature had aired nationwide, showing Gabriel and Robert filming in Mrs. Rose's backyard while discussing the Boston Tea Party, and Robert could only imagine how it must have felt for Claudia to see her son thriving without her. "He is happy," Robert confirmed. "He's found his passion, he has a stable home, and he's surrounded by people who love him unconditionally." There was a long pause before Claudia asked, "Can I see him? Just once?" Robert looked at Gabriel, who was arranging historical props for their next video, completely absorbed in his work and surrounded by the love of Mrs. Rose and the neighborhood community that had adopted them. "That's not my decision to make anymore, Claudia," Robert replied. "Gabriel will decide if and when he's ready to have that conversation. Until then, he knows you exist. He knows you chose to leave, and he knows he's better off where he is." The meeting between Claudia and Gabriel took place 6 months later at a neutral location, the local library where Robert had started his tutoring business and where Gabriel had spent countless hours researching for their videos. Claudia arrived early, dressed simply for the first time Robert could remember, without the designer clothes and expensive accessories that had once defined her identity. When Gabriel walked in holding Mrs. Rose's hand, she had insisted on coming for moral support. Claudia's composure cracked as she saw how much her son had grown. He was taller, more confident, and carried himself with the quiet dignity of a child who had learned that his worth wasn't measured by material possessions. "Hi, Mom," Gabriel said politely, the word "Mom" sounding strange and formal coming from his lips. The conversation was awkward but necessary. Claudia tried to explain why she had left, but her words sounded hollow even to herself. "Mommy made some very bad choices," she said, tears streaming down her face. I thought money was more important than family, and I was wrong about everything. Gabriel listened with the patience of someone far older than his 11 years, occasionally glancing at Mrs. Rose for reassurance. "We're doing okay now," Gabriel told his mother matter-of-factly. "Daddy and I help kids learn history, and Mrs. Rose teaches me about gardening and cooking. We don't have a lot of money, but we have everything we need." The simplicity of his response cut through Claudia's guilt like a knife, showing her exactly what she had lost by choosing material wealth over genuine happiness. Robert watched the interaction with mixed emotions. Part of him felt satisfaction seeing Claudia face the consequences of her choices, but a larger part felt genuine sadness for a woman who had destroyed her own family in pursuit of an impossible dream. Gabriel had grown into an extraordinary young man despite his mother's absence, not because of it, and Robert had learned that being a single parent meant protecting his son's emotional well-being above all else. "Gabriel doesn't need rescuing anymore," Robert told Claudia after their meeting. "He's not the broken child you left behind. He's confident, loved, and building something meaningful with his life. If you want to be part of that, you'll have to earn the privilege slowly and on his terms." The YouTube channel had evolved into something beyond educational content. It had become a platform for teaching empathy, critical thinking, and social responsibility. Gabriel's questions had grown more sophisticated, often touching on issues of justice, equality, and how historical lessons applied to contemporary problems. Their video series on immigration throughout American history, featuring interviews with neighborhood families from different cultural backgrounds, won an award from the National Education Association and was featured in classrooms across the country. "History isn't just about dead people," Gabriel explained in one of their most popular videos. "It's about understanding why people make the choices they do, so we can make better choices ourselves." Mrs. Rose's health had begun to decline gradually, but her spirit remained as vibrant as ever. She had become a beloved figure in their YouTube community, with viewers sending her birthday cards, recipe requests, and thank you letters for her historical insights. When she was diagnosed with early-stage arthritis that made gardening difficult, Gabriel organized the neighborhood kids to help maintain her vegetable garden, turning it into a living laboratory for their videos about agricultural history and sustainable living. "That boy has a heart bigger than Texas," Mrs. Rose told Robert as they watched Gabriel teach younger children how to plant seeds while explaining the role of agriculture in American expansion. "You raised him right, even when everything was falling apart around you." The book series had been published to critical acclaim and commercial success, with History Adventures with Gabriel and Dad becoming a bestseller in educational publishing. The books featured Gabriel's questions as chapter introductions, Robert's explanations in accessible language, and Mrs. Rose's personal anecdotes as sidebar stories that brought historical events to life. Schools across the country were adopting the series as supplementary curriculum, and international publishers were requesting translation rights for markets in Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom. Gabriel had insisted that a portion of the royalties be donated to neighborhood schools and libraries, demonstrating a generosity and social consciousness that made Robert proud beyond words. The speaking engagements had become regular sources of income and influence, with Robert and Gabriel traveling to education conferences, teacher training workshops, and university symposiums where they demonstrated their collaborative approach to historical education. Gabriel's presence at these events was no longer novelty. He was recognized as a legitimate voice in educational innovation, often answering questions from professional educators who were amazed by his insight and articulation. "The future of education isn't about talking at students," Gabriel told an audience of 500 teachers at a Chicago conference. "It's about learning together, asking questions together, and discovering that history is really just stories about people who were trying to figure out life just like we are." The neighborhood transformation had been gradual, but undeniable. Property values had started to increase as young families moved in, attracted by the sense of community and educational innovation that Robert and Gabriel's success had highlighted. New businesses opened, a bookstore cafe that hosted educational events, a community center that offered tutoring programs, and a small museum dedicated to local history. that featured contributions from residents like Mrs. Rose. But the gentrification also brought concerns about long-time residents being priced out, leading Robert to establish a foundation that provided educational scholarships and housing assistance to ensure that the community's character wasn't lost to economic development. Gabriel's relationship with his mother had settled into a careful pattern of supervised visits and phone calls, with Claudia slowly earning back small pieces of trust through consistent behavior and genuine interest in his life. She had found a job as a receptionist at a medical office, moved into a modest apartment, and begun therapy to address the materialistic values that had destroyed her marriage. "I'm not trying to be his mom again," she told Robert honestly. "I lost that right when I chose money over my child. But maybe I can be someone he doesn't have to be ashamed of, someone who learned from her mistakes and became a better person." It was a realistic approach that Robert respected, even if he could never forgive the pain she had caused Gabriel during those early months of adjustment. The national recognition reached a pinnacle when Robert was invited to speak at the White House Education Summit, bringing Gabriel and Mrs. Rose as his guests to a reception celebrating innovative approaches to learning. Standing in the East Room, watching Gabriel confidently discuss historical preservation with senators and education secretaries, while Mrs. Rose charmed foreign diplomats with stories about living through the Cold War, Robert felt a profound sense of completion. This wasn't the life he had planned when he was teaching at private academies and living beyond his means in Westchester County, but it was infinitely more meaningful. They had built something real from the ashes of Claudia's betrayal, something that helped thousands of children while keeping their own family grounded in values that couldn't be bought or sold. The television production company's call came on a Tuesday morning while Robert was editing their latest video about the Industrial Revolution, with Gabriel adding sound effects and Mrs. Rose preparing historically accurate snacks in the kitchen. PBS had been following their YouTube channel for over a year, and they wanted to discuss developing a weekly educational television series that would bring their father-son format to a national audience. "We've never seen anything quite like what you three have created," the producer explained during their video conference. "It's authentic, engaging, and fills a gap in children's educational programming that we didn't even know existed." The offer included a studio budget, professional production team, and creative control that would allow them to maintain the heart of what made their homemade videos special while reaching millions of children across America. Gabriel's reaction to the television opportunity was characteristically thoughtful for an 11-year-old who had learned to weigh consequences carefully. "Will we still be able to help kids learn the same way we do now?" he asked Robert as they walked through their neighborhood, discussing how their lives might change with national television exposure. "And will Mrs. Rose still be part of our show?" Robert assured him that any contract would include Mrs. Rose as a permanent cast member and that they would never compromise their educational mission for entertainment value. "Then I think we should do it," Gabriel decided. "More kids need to know that history is exciting and that learning can be fun. But promise me we won't become like those people on TV who care more about being famous than helping people." Mrs. Rose's excitement about the television show was infectious, but it was mixed with practical concerns about her age and health. "I'm 71 years old, baby," she told Robert as they reviewed the contract details. "My arthritis is getting worse, and I don't want to hold you back if this could be your big break." Robert took her hands gently and explained that there was no show without her, that her wisdom and authenticity were irreplaceable elements of their success. "Besides," Gabriel added, "Grandma Rose, you're the most popular person in our comment section. People love you more than they love me and Daddy combined." The contract negotiation ultimately included provisions for Mrs. Rose's medical care, a comfortable salary, and flexible filming schedules that accommodated her physical limitations. The transition from YouTube to television required significant adjustments, but didn't fundamentally change their approach to education. The PBS studio provided professional cameras, lighting, and sound equipment, but Robert insisted on maintaining the conversational tone and interactive format that had made their homemade videos successful. Gabriel adapted quickly to the teleprompter and multiple camera angles, but he refused to use scripted responses to historical questions, preferring to maintain the spontaneous curiosity that viewers had come to love. Mrs. Rose initially felt intimidated by the professional production environment, but she quickly charmed the entire crew with her stories and became everyone's adopted grandmother within the first week of filming. The first season of History Adventures with Gabriel and Dad premiered to critical acclaim and impressive ratings for educational programming. Television critics praised the show's unique format, noting how Robert's teaching expertise combined with Gabriel's genuine curiosity created an educational experience that felt more like watching a fascinating family conversation than attending a formal classroom lecture. Mrs. Rose's segments became immediate fan favorites, with her Grandma's Kitchen History feature generating cookbook requests and inspiring spin-off content about historical cooking and household management. The show won 3 Emmy nominations in educational categories and was renewed for a second season before the first season finished airing. Gabriel's fame brought both opportunities and challenges that Robert hadn't anticipated. Fan mail arrived daily from children around the world who had been inspired to develop their own interest in history, while educational toy companies and publishers competed to secure Gabriel's endorsement for their products. Robert had to hire a manager to handle the business inquiries and a publicist to coordinate media interviews. But he insisted that Gabriel's education remain the top priority and that any commercial partnerships align with their educational mission. "I don't want Gabriel to become a child star who burns out before he's old enough to vote," Robert told the management team. "I want him to grow up normally, with the television show being just one part of his life, not the entire focus." The income from the television show transformed their financial situation dramatically, allowing Robert to buy Mrs. Rose's house and renovate it into a comfortable home for their extended family. Gabriel got his own room with space for his growing collection of historical books and artifacts, while Mrs. Rose's room was modified with accessibility features that made her daily life easier and safer. The backyard was expanded to include a professional outdoor studio for filming garden-based segments and a greenhouse where Mrs. Rose could continue her botanical experiments year-round. But despite their newfound prosperity, Robert made sure that Gabriel understood the difference between financial security and the materialistic excess that had destroyed his first marriage. The neighborhood's reaction to their television success was overwhelmingly positive, with longtime residents taking pride in their local celebrities while newcomers moved to the area specifically because of the community's reputation for educational innovation. Gabriel's former classmates treated him with the same friendship they always had, thanks largely to Robert's insistence that Gabriel remain enrolled in the local public school rather than switching to an expensive private academy. "My friends don't care that I'm on TV," Gabriel told a reporter who asked about fame affecting his social life. "They care that I still help them with their homework and that I share my snacks during lunch. Being on television doesn't make me better than anyone else. It just gives me a bigger platform to help kids learn." Mrs. Rose had become a cultural icon in her own right, with fan clubs dedicated to her historical cooking segments and her profound observations about American social change over the past 7 decades. Universities invited her to speak at women's studies conferences. Historians requested interviews about her experiences during major historical events, and cookbook publishers competed to ghostwrite her memoirs. "I never thought my old stories would matter to anybody outside this neighborhood," she marveled, as she read letters from viewers who credited her with inspiring their own family history research projects. "Now people are calling me a living historian. All I ever did was pay attention and remember." The second season expanded their format to include field trips to historical sites, interviews with expert historians, and special episodes filmed at locations where significant events had occurred. Gabriel's questions during these segments demonstrated increasing sophistication and emotional intelligence, often focusing on how historical events affected ordinary families and communities rather than just famous leaders and political outcomes. Their episode about Japanese-American internment camps, featuring interviews with survivors and Gabriel's thoughtful questions about justice and prejudice, won a Peabody Award and was distributed to schools nationwide as an educational resource. History isn't just about learning dates and names, Gabriel explained during his acceptance speech. It's about understanding how people survived difficult times and how we can do better when faced with similar challenges. The relationship with Claudia had evolved into something resembling distant friendship, with regular phone calls and occasional visits that no longer carried the weight of guilt and disappointment that had marked their early interactions. She had completed 2 years of therapy, maintained steady employment, and begun volunteering at literacy programs for underprivileged children as a way of giving back to communities like the one where Gabriel now thrived. "I watch every episode," she told Robert during one of their conversations. "I'm proud of the man Gabriel is becoming, and I'm grateful that you gave him the stability and love I couldn't provide. I know I can never undo the damage I caused, but seeing him happy and successful helps me forgive myself a little bit." Robert appreciated her honesty and growth, but he also maintained clear boundaries that protected Gabriel's emotional well-being and their family's stability. The 3rd season of their show introduced international perspectives, with Gabriel and Robert traveling to historical sites in Europe, Asia, and Africa to explore how different cultures had influenced American development. Gabriel's passport filled with stamps from countries where he interviewed historians, visited museums, and asked questions that revealed connections between global events and American history that traditional textbooks often overlooked. Mrs. Rose accompanied them on trips to England and Ireland, where her family heritage allowed her to provide personal context for immigration stories that millions of American families shared. Seeing Gabriel ask questions about the places my grandparents came from made me understand my own history better, she told viewers during their Dublin episode. Sometimes you have to go backward to understand how far you've come forward. The international episodes brought their show global recognition, with foreign educators requesting dubbed versions and international broadcasting networks seeking distribution rights. Gabriel's natural curiosity and respect for different cultures made him an ideal young ambassador for American educational television, and his questions often highlighted universal themes of human struggle and achievement that transcended national boundaries. "People everywhere want the same things," Gabriel observed during their episode about the Berlin Wall. "They want to be safe, to take care of their families, and to have hope for the future. History shows us that walls don't work because they try to divide things that are naturally connected." The financial success of the television show had provided security that Robert used wisely, establishing college funds for Gabriel and other neighborhood children, creating scholarship programs for aspiring teachers, and investing in local businesses that served their community. Unlike his marriage to Claudia, where money had been spent on appearances and status symbols, Robert now used their income to build lasting value and support systems that would benefit others long after their television careers ended. Gabriel had learned these lessons by example, often suggesting that portions of their earnings be donated to educational causes and historical preservation projects that aligned with their show's mission. Gabriel's education had become a collaborative effort between his public school teachers, university professors who consulted on their show, and the practical learning that came from traveling and interviewing experts in various fields. Despite his television fame, he remained grounded in the neighborhood school system, often helping struggling classmates with their homework and serving as a peer tutor for students who were falling behind in social studies. Gabriel never acts like he's smarter than everyone else, his 7th grade teacher, Mr. Martinez, told Robert during a parent conference. He acts like learning is exciting and contagious, and he makes other students want to ask questions and explore topics more deeply. Mrs. Rose's health had stabilized with proper medical care and the support system that their success had made possible, but she had begun talking about her legacy and the impact she wanted to have beyond their television show. She had started writing her memoirs with help from a professional ghostwriter, documenting not just her personal experiences but also the social changes she had witnessed over 7 decades of American life. "I want young people to understand that change is possible," she explained as she worked on chapters about the civil rights movement, women's liberation, and technological advancement. "Every generation thinks their problems are impossible to solve, but history shows us that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they work together." The 4th season focused on contemporary applications of historical lessons, with episodes that connected past events to current social issues and encouraged viewers to think critically about how historical understanding could inform modern decision-making. Gabriel's questions during these episodes demonstrated remarkable maturity, often addressing topics like immigration, economic inequality, and racial justice with the thoughtfulness of someone far older than his 13 years. "If we know that certain policies didn't work in the past, why do people keep trying them again?" Gabriel asked during an episode about economic policies during the Great Depression. "And if we know that some things did work, why don't we do more of those things?" His questions often left both his father and expert guests pausing to consider profound implications they hadn't initially recognized. The recognition from the educational community had grown to include honorary doctorates for Robert from 3 universities, invitations to serve on national education policy committees, and requests to consult on curriculum development projects at state and federal levels. Gabriel had been invited to address the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization about the role of young people in historical education, becoming the youngest person ever to speak at a UNESCO General Conference. "History belongs to everyone," Gabriel told the international audience of education ministers and policymakers. "It's not something that only happens in classrooms or museums. It's happening right now, and we're all part of creating it together." The impact of their show extended beyond entertainment and education to influence policy discussions about funding for public schools, support for educational innovation, and the importance of community-based learning initiatives. Politicians from both parties cited their success as evidence that creative approaches to education could work in underfunded districts, while education researchers studied their methods to understand how family-based learning models could be replicated in different contexts. Robert found himself testifying before congressional committees about education funding and serving on task forces that developed recommendations for improving American educational outcomes. Claudia's transformation had continued steadily, with her volunteer work expanding to include mentoring other divorced women who were struggling with the transition from middle-class comfort to economic uncertainty. She had completed a bachelor's degree in social work through evening classes and secured a position with a non-profit organization that provided support services for single-parent families. "Working with families who are going through what I put Gabriel through has been the hardest and most important thing I've ever done," she told Robert during one of their periodic check-ins. "I can't undo the damage I caused, but I can try to prevent other children from experiencing what Gabriel experienced because of my choices." The relationship between Gabriel and his mother had evolved into something respectful but distant, with Gabriel acknowledging her efforts to change while maintaining clear emotional boundaries that protected his sense of security and family loyalty. Their phone conversations had become more natural over time, with Claudia asking about Gabriel's school projects and television work without trying to insert herself back into his daily life. "I'm proud of the person you're becoming," she told Gabriel during one of their calls. "I know I don't have the right to take credit for any of your success, but I want you to know that watching you grow into such a thoughtful, caring young man has helped me become a better person too." Gabriel accepted her words graciously, but without the eagerness for maternal approval that might have defined a younger child's response. The 5th season premiere was scheduled to coincide with Gabriel's 14th birthday, featuring a special episode about coming-of-age traditions throughout American history that would mark his transition from child host to teenage educator. Robert had planned a neighborhood celebration that would include all the people who had supported their journey: Mrs., Rose and her extensive circle of friends, Gabriel's classmates and teachers, neighbors who had provided encouragement during their difficult early days, and television crew members who had become extended family. As they prepared for this milestone, Robert reflected on how completely their lives had changed from the dark days when Claudia had thrown them out of Westchester County, and he felt grateful not just for their success, but for the values and relationships they had built along the way to achieving it. The milestone birthday celebration filled the neighborhood with camera crews, catered food trucks, and hundreds of people who had been touched by Gabriel's journey from abandoned child to nationally recognized educator. Gabriel moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had learned to balance humility with achievement, spending time with elderly neighbors who remembered him as a quiet 10-year-old and young children who knew him only as the famous teenager from television. Mrs. Rose, now 73 and moving more slowly but still sharp as ever, held court near the buffet table, telling stories about Gabriel's early years to reporters who were documenting the celebration for a feature article about their continued success. The guest list reflected the breadth of Gabriel's impact on different communities. His 7th grade classmates played basketball with children from families who had benefited from their scholarship programs, while university professors discussed curriculum development with local teachers who had implemented Gabriel's question-based learning techniques in their own classrooms. Robert watched these interactions with profound satisfaction, seeing how their television success had created bridges between different social and economic groups, rather than separating them from their roots. "This is what real success looks like," he told a documentary filmmaker who was creating a feature about their story. "It's not about escaping your community. It's about lifting your community with you." Gabriel's birthday speech to the assembled crowd demonstrated the rhetorical skills he had developed through years of television interviews and public appearances, but it also revealed the values that Robert and Mrs. Rose had instilled in him during their years of struggle and growth. 5 years ago, my mom decided that poor people belonged in the ghetto, and she threw me and my dad out of our fancy apartment because we didn't have enough money to make her happy," Gabriel began, his voice carrying across the crowd with surprising authority. "She thought she was punishing us, but she actually gave us the greatest gift possible. She taught us that family isn't about money, and she forced us to discover that we could build something beautiful with our own hands, our own minds, and the love of people who chose to be part of our lives." The television production company had offered Gabriel his own spin-off series now that he was entering high school, but Robert and Gabriel had decided together that maintaining their collaborative format was more important than individual fame or increased income. "We work better as a team," Gabriel explained to the network executives who had presented the offer. "My dad teaches me how to think critically, Mrs. Rose teaches me how to understand people, and I ask the questions that kids my age actually want answered. If you separate us, you lose the thing that makes our show special." The network ultimately agreed to develop an expanded version of their existing show that would feature Gabriel taking on more hosting responsibilities while maintaining the family dynamic that audiences loved. Mrs. Rose had completed her memoir, titled Watching History: 7 Decades of American Change Through One Woman's Eyes, which became a bestseller and established her as a respected voice in discussions about social progress, community building, and the importance of intergenerational relationships. Her book tour, which she undertook despite her arthritis and occasional fatigue, brought her to universities, community centers, and bookstores, where audiences were captivated by her stories and impressed by her analysis of how American society had evolved over her lifetime. "That woman has lived through more history than most people read about in textbooks," a professor at Howard University commented after Mrs. Rose's lecture about the civil rights movement. "But more than that, she understands how big historical changes affect regular families, and she can explain those connections in ways that help people understand their own lives better." The scholarship program that Robert had established with their television earnings had grown into a comprehensive educational foundation that provided not only college funding, but also mentoring, tutoring, and family support services for low-income students who showed academic promise but lacked resources. Gabriel served on the Foundation's Youth Advisory Board, helping to identify recipients and develop programs that addressed the real challenges facing students from backgrounds similar to his own. "We don't just give money," Gabriel explained during a Foundation fundraising event. "We give relationships, support systems, and opportunities for students to discover their own passions the way I discovered mine. Money alone doesn't change lives. Caring adults and meaningful opportunities change lives." The international recognition had led to consulting opportunities with educational systems in other countries that were struggling to engage students and improve learning outcomes. Robert and Gabriel had traveled to Finland, South Korea, and Singapore to study different approaches to education, while also sharing their own methods with educators who were seeking to incorporate family-based and community-centered learning into their curricula. Gabriel's observations about these different educational systems often surprised adult educators with their insight and maturity. In some countries, they focus so much on test scores that they forget learning is supposed to be enjoyable, Gabriel noted after visiting a high-pressure academic environment in Seoul. In other places, they focus so much on making learning fun that they forget it's supposed to challenge students to think deeply. The best education happens when students are excited about learning difficult things. The relationship with Claudia had settled into a pattern that resembled distant relatives who cared about each other but didn't share daily life. She attended Gabriel's birthday celebration at his invitation, staying in the background and avoiding interactions with neighbors who remembered the circumstances of her departure. When Gabriel introduced her to some of his friends as "my mother who used to live with us," the simple phrase captured both acknowledgement and distance in a way that seemed healthy for everyone involved. Claudia had learned to find satisfaction in Gabriel's achievements without trying to claim credit for them, understanding that her role in his life was now limited to being someone who was proud of him from afar. Gabriel's high school years brought new challenges as he balanced academic requirements with television production schedules, college preparation, and the normal social development that Robert was determined to preserve despite their unusual circumstances. Gabriel had chosen to attend the neighborhood public high school rather than accepting scholarship offers from prestigious private academies, explaining that he wanted to stay connected to the community that had supported his family during their difficult transition. His teachers and classmates treated him as a normal student who happened to have an unusual after-school job, which allowed him to develop friendships and participate in activities like debate team and student government that had nothing to do with his television career. The impact on their neighborhood had been transformative, but not overwhelming, with property values rising gradually rather than experiencing the rapid gentrification that often displaces longtime residents. Robert had worked with city planners and community organizations to ensure that development served existing residents rather than replacing them, using his influence and resources to support affordable housing initiatives and small business development that preserved the area's character while improving economic opportunities. "Success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself," Robert told a graduate school class where he had been invited to speak about community development. "It's about whether your achievements create more opportunities for other people or whether they just widen the gap between those who have and those who don't." The 6th season of their show, which would premiere during Gabriel's sophomore year of high school, was being developed as a more sophisticated exploration of complex historical topics that reflected Gabriel's increasing maturity and analytical abilities. Rather than simply learning about historical events, they were examining historical methodology, discussing how different perspectives shape historical narratives, and encouraging viewers to think critically about the sources and biases that influence their understanding of the past. "History isn't just facts that happened," Gabriel explained during a preview interview. "It's stories that people tell about facts, and those stories change depending on who's telling them and why. Learning to think critically about historical sources helps you think critically about information in general, which is something everyone needs to know how to do." The call that would change everything came on a Wednesday morning during Gabriel's junior year, while he was reviewing college applications and Robert was preparing materials for a congressional hearing on education funding. The History Channel's senior programming director was on the line with an offer that seemed too good to be true. They wanted to develop a prime-time documentary series hosted by Gabriel, focusing on untold stories from American history that would appeal to adult audiences while maintaining the educational integrity that had made their PBS show successful. "We've been watching Gabriel's development for 3 years," the director explained. "He's evolved from a curious child into a serious young historian who can handle complex topics and engage adult viewers. This could be the next step in his career development and a significant expansion of his platform for educational impact." The History Channel offer represented everything that Robert had dreamed of for Gabriel's future: national recognition, significant financial compensation, and the opportunity to influence historical education on the largest possible scale. But it also meant leaving PBS, their production team that had become family, and the community-centered approach that had defined their success. Gabriel's reaction was characteristically thoughtful, asking detailed questions about creative control, content standards, and how the new show would different from sensationalized historical programming that prioritized entertainment over accuracy. "I don't want to become one of those people who dumbs down history to make it more exciting," Gabriel told Robert as they discussed the offer. "History is already exciting when you understand how it connects to people's lives. I don't want to lose that just to reach more viewers." Mrs. Rose's perspective on the opportunity was shaped by her understanding of how success could change people in ways they didn't anticipate. "That boy has stayed humble and focused on helping others through everything that's happened to him," she told Robert during one of their evening conversations in the garden. "But this kind of opportunity could change him in ways we can't predict. On the other hand, he might be able to reach people who would never watch educational television and help them understand why history matters." Her wisdom carried special weight because she had watched Gabriel grow from a displaced child into a confident teenager without losing his core values or his connection to the community that had supported his development. The decision process took 3 months of careful consideration, during which Gabriel visited the History Channel offices, met with producers and executives, and reviewed sample content to understand how his hosting style would fit with their programming approach. Robert insisted on maintaining veto power over content decisions and final edit approval to ensure that educational integrity wouldn't be compromised for ratings. Gabriel's lawyer, they had needed professional representation since the PBS contract, negotiated clauses that would allow him to continue his community work and scholarship programs while fulfilling his television obligations. "I want to make sure that success doesn't separate me from the people and places that made success possible," Gabriel explained to the network executives, who seemed surprised by his demands for community involvement guarantees. The transition to primetime television required significant adjustments in Gabriel's approach to historical education, as adult audiences expected more sophisticated analysis and deeper exploration of controversial topics that had been simplified for younger viewers. Gabriel rose to this challenge by developing research skills that impressed professional historians, and by asking questions that revealed connections between historical events and contemporary issues in ways that made abstract concepts relevant to modern viewers. His first History Channel documentary, The Other Side of the Gold Rush, examined the environmental destruction and cultural genocide that accompanied westward expansion, presenting a balanced but unflinching look at events that traditional textbooks often romanticized. Mrs. Rose's role in the new series evolved from beloved grandmother figure to respected historical consultant, with her personal experiences and family stories providing crucial context for understanding how major historical events affected ordinary American families. Her segments in the History Channel series carried more weight and authority than her previous appearances, as producers recognized that her authentic voice could provide credibility for controversial topics and help viewers understand how historical events influenced the communities and families that lived through them. "I never thought my old stories would end up on primetime television," she marveled as she prepared for her first major interview segment. But I guess every generation needs to hear from the people who actually lived through the history they're studying. The financial success of the History Channel contract provided resources that Gabriel used to expand his educational foundation and establish a summer camp program that brought together students from different economic backgrounds to study history through hands-on activities, field trips, and collaborative projects. The camp, located in the same neighborhood where Gabriel had rebuilt his life after Claudia's abandonment, served students who ranged from wealthy suburban children to inner-city kids who had never traveled outside their immediate communities. Learning happens best when different perspectives come together, Gabriel explained to parents during the camp's orientation session. Kids from different backgrounds ask different questions about the same historical events, and those questions help everyone understand history more completely. The national platform had made Gabriel's voice influential in policy discussions about education funding, curriculum development, and the role of historical understanding in addressing contemporary social issues. He testified before congressional committees, consulted with state education departments, and served on advisory boards that developed national standards for social studies education. Politicians from both parties cited his success as evidence that innovative approaches to education could work in underfunded districts, while education researchers studied his methods to understand how family-based learning models could be replicated in different contexts. Gabriel's approach proves that students learn better when they're actively engaged in asking questions rather than passively receiving information, testified Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor of education at Stanford University, during a Senate hearing where Gabriel had also provided testimony. The relationship with his mother had continued to evolve in ways that reflected Gabriel's increasing maturity and Claudia's sustained commitment to personal growth and community service. Their interactions had become more natural over time, with regular phone conversations about Gabriel's work and Claudia's volunteer activities, but without any attempt to recreate the mother-son relationship that had been damaged by her abandonment. Gabriel respected her efforts to change and rebuild her life, but he also maintained clear emotional boundaries that protected the family structure he had built with Robert and Mrs. Rose. "I'm glad she's doing better," Gabriel told an interviewer who asked about his mother during a profile for Time magazine. "But the people who were there during the hard times are the people who earned the right to be called family. She's someone I care about, but she's not someone I depend on." The success of Gabriel's first History Channel documentary led to a multi-year contract for a series that would explore different aspects of American history through the lens of social justice, economic development, and cultural change. Gabriel's hosting style had matured significantly, allowing him to handle controversial topics with nuance and intelligence while maintaining the curiosity and accessibility that had made him popular with younger audiences. His second documentary, Reconstruction Reconsidered, challenged common misconceptions about the post-Civil War era and sparked national conversations about how historical narratives are constructed and why accurate historical understanding matters for contemporary policy decisions. The 10th anniversary of Claudia's abandonment was marked not with bitterness or celebration, but with quiet reflection on how completely their lives had been transformed by what had initially seemed like a devastating betrayal. Gabriel, now 17 and preparing for his senior year of high school, had become a nationally recognized voice in historical education while maintaining strong connections to the community that had supported his family during their transition from poverty to prosperity. Robert had evolved from a displaced teacher to a respected expert in educational innovation and community development. Mrs. Rose had transformed from a lonely widow to a celebrated author and historical commentator whose wisdom influenced policy discussions and academic research. "Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you ends up being the best thing that could have happened," Gabriel reflected during an interview marking the anniversary. "Not because the pain wasn't real or because we should be grateful for being hurt, but because we learned that we were stronger than we thought and that we could build something beautiful from the broken pieces." Gabriel's high school graduation ceremony took place in the same community center where Robert had first started tutoring neighborhood children for $20 per session, transformed now into a celebration space filled with families, educators, politicians, and media representatives who had come to witness this milestone in the life of America's most famous teenage historian. Gabriel delivered the valedictorian speech to a standing-room-only crowd that included not only his classmates and their families, but also producers from 3 television networks, education researchers from major universities, and community leaders who had watched him grow from a displaced child into a confident young adult. Mrs. Rose, now 75 and using a walker but still mentally sharp and emotionally vibrant, sat in the front row next to Robert, both of them beaming with pride as Gabriel spoke about the importance of education, community support, and the responsibility that comes with opportunity. The scholarship offers that poured in from universities across the country represented opportunities that most students could only dream about. Full rides to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and a dozen other prestigious institutions that wanted to associate their names with Gabriel's success and potential for continued achievement. But Gabriel's choice surprised many observers when he announced his intention to attend Howard University, specifically because of their strong programs in African American history, social justice, and community organizing. I want to learn from professors and students who understand how education can be used to address inequality and create positive social change, Gabriel explained during his announcement press conference. Prestige is less important to me than finding a learning environment where I can develop the knowledge and skills I need to make a real difference in people's lives. Robert's pride in Gabriel's college choice was mixed with anxiety about sending his son away after 7 years of constant collaboration and shared purpose. They had been a team through poverty, struggle, success, and fame, and the prospect of Gabriel living independently in Washington, D.C., while pursuing his own academic interests represented a natural but difficult transition for both of them. He's ready for this next step, Mrs. Rose assured Robert as they prepared for Gabriel's departure. You raised him to think for himself and care about other people. Now you have to trust that those values will guide him when he's making decisions without your input. The farewell dinner they organized in their backyard brought together everyone who had been part of Gabriel's journey, creating a celebration that honored the past while acknowledging that the future would be different but equally meaningful. The summer before college, Gabriel used his platform to launch a national initiative called History Matters, designed to encourage young people to research and document the stories of their own families and communities as a way of understanding how personal experiences connect to larger historical narratives. The project provided free resources, training materials, and small grants to help teenagers conduct oral history interviews with elderly relatives, research family immigration stories, and create multimedia presentations that connected their personal heritage to significant historical events. Within 6 months, over 5,000 students had participated in the program, creating a digital archive of family histories that provided unprecedented insight into how major historical events affected ordinary American families. Mrs. Rose's health had begun to decline more noticeably, with her arthritis limiting her mobility and occasional memory lapses that concerned Robert and Gabriel, despite her doctor's assurances that she was experiencing normal age-related changes rather than serious cognitive decline. Her role in their television work had been reduced to occasional appearances rather than regular segments, but her influence on Gabriel's intellectual development remained profound. That woman taught me that wisdom comes from paying attention to life rather than just reading about it, Gabriel told an interviewer who asked about Mrs. Rose's impact on his education. She showed me that every person has important stories to tell if you know how to ask the right questions and listen carefully to the answers. The History Channel series had become a cultural phenomenon, with Gabriel's documentaries sparking national conversations about topics ranging from Native American genocide to the economic causes of the Great Depression to the role of women in the labor movement. His approach to controversial historical topics, presenting multiple perspectives while maintaining clear moral positions about human rights and social justice, had earned respect from both conservative and liberal historians who appreciated his commitment to accuracy and his refusal to oversimplify complex issues for entertainment value. Gabriel has mastered the art of making sophisticated historical analysis accessible to general audiences without dumbing it down, wrote Dr. Michael Washington, a professor of history at Columbia University, in his review of Gabriel's latest documentary about the Harlem Renaissance. The financial success of Gabriel's television career had provided resources that Robert used strategically to support educational initiatives and community development projects that addressed the root causes of poverty and inequality rather than just treating symptoms. Their foundation had expanded to include vocational training programs, small business development loans, and housing assistance for families facing eviction or foreclosure. Money is a tool, Robert explained during a philanthropy conference where he had been invited to speak about effective charitable giving. It can be used to make yourself more comfortable, or it can be used to make other people's lives better. Gabriel and I learned during our difficult years that the support of caring adults and stable communities is what actually changes lives, so that's where we focus our resources. Gabriel's influence on educational policy had grown beyond his television appearances to include formal positions on national advisory committees and task forces that developed recommendations for improving American educational outcomes. His testimony before congressional committees carried weight not just because of his fame, but because of his first-hand experience with both educational failure and educational innovation, combined with his sophisticated understanding of how policy decisions affect real students and families. We need to stop treating education like a business where success is measured only by test scores, Gabriel told a Senate committee examining education funding formulas. Real educational success should be measured by whether students develop critical thinking skills, whether they maintain curiosity about learning, and whether they graduate with the knowledge and values they need to contribute positively to their communities. The college preparation process had been complicated by Gabriel's unusual circumstances, as traditional metrics like standardized test scores and grade point averages didn't fully capture his intellectual development or his practical experience in research, public speaking, and project management. Howard University's admissions committee had been particularly interested in Gabriel's demonstrated commitment to social justice and his plans to use his education for community service rather than personal advancement. Gabriel represents the kind of student we hope to attract and develop, said Dr. Jennifer Williams, Howard's Dean of Admissions. He has already demonstrated that he can use his talents and opportunities to benefit others, and we expect that his college experience will enhance his ability to address the social challenges that affect communities like the one where he grew up. The farewell celebration for Gabriel's departure to college filled their neighborhood with friends, neighbors, former classmates, television colleagues, and political figures who had been influenced by his work over the past 7 years. Claudia attended the celebration at Gabriel's invitation, staying respectfully in the background, but visibly emotional, as she watched her son accept congratulations and well wishes from people whose lives he had touched through his educational work. "I know I don't have the right to feel proud of him," she told Robert quietly during the celebration, "but I want you to know that watching him become the person he is today has been the most important lesson of my life. He's everything I should have valued when I had the chance, and seeing his success has taught me what really matters in life." Robert accepted her words graciously, recognizing that her growth and regret were genuine even if they couldn't undo the damage she had caused during Gabriel's formative years. As Gabriel prepared to leave for Howard University, he and Robert had several long conversations about how their professional collaboration would evolve during his college years and beyond. They had decided to continue producing documentaries during Gabriel's winter and summer breaks, while also developing a new format that would allow Gabriel to explore topics related to his college coursework and connect his formal education to their ongoing educational mission. "The show gave me a platform and resources that most people my age don't have," Gabriel reflected during one of these conversations. "I want to use my college experience to become even better at researching complex topics and communicating important ideas to people who might not otherwise be interested in history." The goal isn't just to get a degree. The goal is to become more effective at using education to create positive change. As Robert watched his son pack for college, he felt a mixture of pride, anxiety, and profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them from a moment of abandonment and despair to this milestone of achievement and opportunity. The final confrontation came during Gabriel's sophomore year at Howard University, on a crisp October afternoon, when Claudia appeared unannounced at Robert's door carrying a suitcase and wearing the desperate expression of someone whose carefully constructed life had collapsed around her. She had been laid off from her non-profit job due to budget cuts, evicted from her apartment for non-payment of rent, and was facing the same financial crisis that she had once used to justify abandoning her family. "Robert, I have nowhere else to go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I've lost everything again. And you're the only person I know who might understand what it feels like to start over from nothing." Robert looked at the woman who had once called him a failure and told him that poor people belonged in the ghetto, and felt a complex mixture of compassion, satisfaction, and protective instinct for the life he had built without her. The conversation that followed took place in the same living room, where Gabriel had once asked why his mommy was so angry, where Mrs. Rose had shared stories about living through historical events, and where Robert had edited their first YouTube videos on an old laptop. Claudia sat on the edge of the couch like a stranger, which in many ways she was, while Robert maintained the calm authority of someone who had learned to control his reactions through years of public speaking and media interviews. "Claudia, I'm sorry that you're going through difficulties," Robert said carefully. "But this house is Gabriel's sanctuary, the place where he comes when he needs to feel safe and connected to his roots. I can't allow anything to disrupt that stability, not even temporarily." The weight of her choices hung between them like a physical presence, all the years of Gabriel's growth and achievement that she had missed by choosing material wealth over family loyalty. Mrs. Rose, now 77 and increasingly frail but still mentally sharp, observed the interaction from her chair by the window with the wisdom of someone who had seen enough human drama to understand the deeper currents beneath surface conversations. When Claudia asked if she could at least stay for a few days while she figured out her next steps, Mrs. Rose spoke with the quiet authority that had made her a respected voice in their community. "Honey, you made your choices when that boy needed you most," she said gently but firmly. "Now he's built a life where he feels secure and loved. You can't ask him to risk that security to fix problems that you created by rejecting him in the first place." Her words carried the weight of someone who had earned the right to speak for Gabriel's emotional well-being through years of consistent love and support. Robert offered Claudia practical assistance without emotional reconciliation, contact information for social services, references for temporary housing assistance, and the name of a job counselor who had helped other people rebuild their careers after setbacks. But he also made clear that their successful life was not available for her to lean on when her own choices led to failure. "Gabriel has a beautiful life now," Robert explained. "He's excelling at Howard. His documentaries are changing how people think about American history, and he's surrounded by people who supported him when he had nothing to offer in return. I won't allow anyone to threaten that stability, even if it means being harsh with someone who's struggling." The boundary was firm, but not cruel, recognizing Claudia's humanity while protecting the family that had been built without her. Gabriel's response when Robert called to inform him about Claudia's visit demonstrated the emotional intelligence and clear thinking that had made him successful as an educator and communicator. "Dad, you did the right thing," Gabriel said without hesitation. "I feel bad that she's having a hard time, but that doesn't mean we're responsible for fixing her problems. We learned how to take care of ourselves when she decided we weren't worth taking care of, and we can't let guilt about her struggles undo the good things we've built." His maturity in handling the situation reflected years of therapy, honest conversations with Robert and Mrs. Rose, and the confidence that comes from building a life based on authentic relationships rather than obligation or guilt. The documentary that Gabriel completed during his junior year at Howard titled Resilience: How American Families Survive Economic Crisis, featured interviews with dozens of families who had rebuilt their lives after job loss, foreclosure, divorce, or other financial catastrophes. The project allowed Gabriel to explore themes that resonated with his own experience while maintaining the professional distance necessary for objective journalism. One segment featured a single father who had been laid off during the pandemic and was raising 3 children while starting a small business from his garage, demonstrating the same combination of determination and resourcefulness that Robert had shown during their difficult early years. Economic hardship doesn't have to define you, Gabriel concluded in the documentary's final segment. But how you respond to hardship, whether you maintain your values, protect your relationships, and keep working towards something better, that does define you. Mrs. Rose's final television appearance took place during Gabriel's senior year, in a special retrospective episode that celebrated their 7-year collaboration and looked forward to Gabriel's post-graduation plans. She was visibly frailer than in previous appearances, but her mind remained sharp and her storytelling ability intact as she reflected on watching Gabriel grow from a displaced child into a nationally recognized educator. "I've lived long enough to see a lot of young people face difficult circumstances," she told the interviewer, "but I've never seen anyone handle adversity with the grace and determination that Gabriel showed. He took the worst thing that happened to him and used it to help thousands of other children learn and grow. That's what real strength looks like." 3 months later, Mrs. Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the family photographs and achievement awards that documented Gabriel's journey from childhood to young adulthood. Gabriel's college graduation was attended by representatives from major television networks, publishing companies, museums, and universities who were competing to secure his services for various projects and positions. But Gabriel surprised many observers by announcing his intention to spend 2 years working for Teach for America, bringing innovative educational approaches to underserved communities before pursuing graduate school in education policy. "I want to understand what classroom teaching is really like before I continue making recommendations about how to improve education," Gabriel explained during his graduation speech. "My father taught me that real expertise comes from direct experience, not just theoretical knowledge. I need to earn the right to influence educational policy by proving that my ideas work in real classrooms with real students who face real challenges." Robert's pride in Gabriel's post-graduation plans was mixed with recognition that their professional collaboration was evolving into something more independent but equally meaningful. Gabriel would continue producing documentaries during summers and school breaks, but his primary focus would shift to direct service and policy development rather than media production. "He's ready to make his own mark on the world," Robert told Mrs. Rose's family during her memorial service. "Everything we built together was designed to give him the foundation he needed to become his own person and pursue his own mission. Watching him choose service over fame and policy work over entertainment industry success tells me that we did something right." The transition felt natural and appropriate, even as it marked the end of one chapter in their shared story. The final episode of their History Channel series featured Gabriel and Robert having one last father-son conversation about American history, but this time focusing on the future rather than the past. They discussed the challenges facing Gabriel's generation, the role that historical understanding could play in addressing contemporary problems, and the importance of using education to build bridges between different communities rather than reinforcing divisions. "History teaches us that change is possible," Gabriel concluded as the cameras rolled for the last time in their backyard studio. "Every generation faces problems that seem impossible to solve, but when people work together with knowledge, compassion, and commitment to justice, they can create solutions that previous generations couldn't imagine. That's what my father taught me when my mother told us that poor people belonged in the ghetto. He showed me that we didn't have to accept that judgment, and that we could build something beautiful regardless of what other people thought about our circumstances." As Gabriel prepared to begin his teaching career in a low-income school district in Detroit, The house that had once echoed with Mrs. Rose's laughter and Gabriel's childhood questions had become quieter, but not empty. Robert continued his educational consulting work and foundation activities, while also writing a book about innovative approaches to single parenting and community-based education. The garden where they had filmed hundreds of educational segments had been transformed into a memorial space honoring Mrs. Rose's contributions to their success, with a bench where Robert could sit and reflect on the journey from abandonment to achievement that had defined the past decade of their lives. Occasionally, neighbors would stop by to share updates about their own children's educational progress or to seek advice about family challenges. And Robert would remember Mrs. Rose's wisdom about how success creates responsibility to help others facing similar struggles. The last conversation between Robert and Claudia took place 3 years after her desperate visit, when she called to congratulate Gabriel on winning a national teaching award for his innovative curriculum development work in Detroit. She had found stable employment as a social worker and had maintained her volunteer work with single-parent families, building a modest but meaningful life focused on service rather than material acquisition. "I watch Gabriel's documentaries sometimes," she told Robert during their brief conversation. "I'm proud of the man he's become, and I'm grateful that you and Mrs. Rose gave him the foundation he needed to succeed. I know I can never undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that his success has taught me what really matters in life, and I'm trying to use that lesson to help other families avoid the mistakes I made." Robert accepted her words with the grace of someone who had learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and that success is measured not by the approval of those who abandoned you, but by the love and loyalty of those who chose to stay and build something beautiful together despite the obstacles.